All right. It is the Friday before Thanksgiving. If you're listening to this later in the time-space continuum, just know that sometimes we pre-record things. We are here with NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine, former Oklahoma Congressman, lifelong Tulsan, former Navy pilot, former director of the Tulsa Air and Space Museum. This guy's worn a lot of hats and a couple of helmets over the years. And you're back in town this week, and I guess news got around that you were coming to town, and man, you've been a busy boy.
Yeah, it's been pretty busy. We spoke at the Tulsa Chamber of Commerce a few days ago. I got invited to Oklahoma City to speak at what's called the Oklahoma City Town Hall, which was a great forum. But you're absolutely right. As the NASA administrator, when I do these things, I'll get a lot of requests for media interviews these days, and I'm happy to be back with you, Russ. You're a great reporter, and I appreciate being on your show.
That is very kind of you. I wish I had a show. I wish that they need to give me a show. In fact, if you could lobby for that.
All right.
So, interestingly, last night I was playing this game online, and I've got friends around the world, and one of them mentioned that he'd just seen this amazing documentary about how there's plans to go back to the moon, and he was like, oh my God, I wish I could go back 20, 30 years and start my life over and be on that career path, because how much fun would that be? And I was like, oh yeah, well, I'm going to be sitting down with the NASA administrator tomorrow. Nobody believed me. Do they believe you when you tell them we're going back?
Oh, absolutely. We are going back. So think about this. We're not just going back, though. We're going forward. I think it's a key distinction. We're going to the moon to stay. In other words, we're going to build an architecture where we can live and work on another world, namely the moon, but we're doing it with a purpose, and that purpose is to get to Mars. So in order to achieve that, we're building a space station in orbit around the moon. We call it Gateway, and we're building landers that can go back and forth from the Gateway over and over again, all of it being reusable. If you go back to Apollo, we had in orbit around the moon at the time what was called a command module. Mm-hmm. It launched with the Saturn rocket, and when the lander was done landing on the moon, the astronauts flew back to the command module. But at the end, the command module got thrown away. It was not reusable.
Kind of everything got thrown away, right?
Nothing was
everything.
Reusable. The rocket, the crew capsule, the command module, everything got thrown away. The lander, nothing was reusable, which is why it was so expensive. So now we're trying to drive down the cost. We're not trying, we are. We're driving down the cost by creating reusability. And of course, we have a lot of advantages today that we didn't have in the 1960s. We've got the miniaturization of electronics. We're able to store power in a lot less mass. So power densities are improving. We have, of course, enhanced computing power from the 1960s. So we have so many advantages. So this time when we go to the moon, we're gonna build reusable systems. We're gonna build sustainable architectures, and when we go to the moon, we're gonna stay. That gateway that I talked about, that space station in orbit around the moon, is maneuverable. So it's not just gonna stay in one spot. The thing about Apollo, we love Apollo, but we went to the equatorial region of the moon 6 times during Apollo. For 40 years, we missed the fact that there's hundreds of millions of tons of water ice on the south pole of the moon.
Which is absolutely key, and we'll get into that in a minute.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So the key is with the orbital platform that we call Gateway around the moon, it has solar electric propulsion. So it can go to the North Pole, it can go to the South Pole. The idea is we won't miss these kind of discoveries again. Imagine if you're coming to Earth for the first time and you land in Oklahoma, and you assess that all of the world is like Oklahoma. Well, you wouldn't know that we've got polar ice caps, and you wouldn't know that we've got a Sahara Desert, and you wouldn't know that we've got the Rocky Mountains. So what we're doing now when we go to the moon is we're going to go to all parts of the moon, and we're going to have multiple missions on the moon at the same time. And the orbital platform around the moon is, think of it as like a lunar, we call it the Gateway, but it's a space station. It's a base, if you will. And that lunar space station is going to be evolvable. It can grow, and it eventually becomes the Mars ship.
So another thing that we have now that we didn't have then is the involvement of the commercial sector, of getting private entrepreneurs and involved, using their ideas, and then making all this technology like open source?
That's exactly right. So two things. When we talk about the rockets themselves, a number of years ago, NASA made a decision that we're not going to purchase, own, and operate the rockets that resupply the International Space Station. So right now, we're doing that as a commercial service. We buy a service from a commercial operator that is going to space to deliver all kinds of other things to space. It could be remote sensing satellites or communication satellites. But in this particular case, we're asking them to service the International Space Station with resupply capability. Now we're expanding on that, and we're not just going to do resupply, but we're also going to do crew to the International Space Station.
So the actual crew modules and some of the people.
Well, yeah, they'll all be, well, not all, but a lot of the people and the crew modules will be commercial. They won't be NASA. NASA doesn't own and operate the hardware. And in fact, some of the people that go are going to be commercial astronauts, not NASA astronauts. So that's another significant change. So NASA is working on that. And then when we go to the space station, the International Space Station, the goal is to have commercial space stations that come after the International Space Station. So then we'll have commercial resupply to space, commercial crew to space, and commercial space stations, multiple space stations, so that we have this very robust commercial architecture for human spaceflight in low Earth orbit. So these are all important. Now, you mentioned open architecture. Mm-hmm. What we're doing at the moon, everything I just talked about was the International Space Station, which is in low Earth orbit. But what we're doing at the moon is we're building this gateway, the space station around the moon, with an open architecture. So how we do docking and how we do life support, environmental control, avionics, data, communications, all of these things are going to be available to the public online for free. So if Russell Mills wants to go start a private space company and go to the moon, you can use NASA's architecture to go to the moon. And we want you to do that. We want to encourage you to do that. You're gonna need to invest a lot of your own money, make no mistake. Yeah. But we have an architecture that makes it easier for you to accomplish these objectives. So we want to build architecture, but we also want to go with commercial partners, and we want to go with international partners. So small countries like United Arab Emirates, if they want to have a moon mission, partner with NASA, and we can help you get to the moon.
So these private companies that are getting involved, obviously they exist, because of the ye old profit motive. There's, a reason that capitalism works. And I don't know if we want to use the word commercial exploitation or, I don't know how you want to phrase it, but we really don't know what all could be found out there in rare metals or,
That's right. So there's a number of different markets out there in deep space that we believe will mature over time. Number one is the water ice. That's a very precious resource in space. Our astronauts are going to need it for life support. It's air to breathe. It's water to drink. It's also rocket fuel.
Oh, rocket fuel.
Hydrogen and oxygen is rocket fuel. It's the same rocket fuel that powered the space shuttles, and it's available in hundreds of millions of tons on the south pole of the moon. So if we can get access to it and we can crack the H2O into hydrogen and oxygen, put it into cryogenic form and put it in orbit around the moon at the gateway, now we've got a deep space refueling station in orbit around the moon. So if we want to do a mission to Mars, that's maybe a good way to go.
Also a lot easier to launch said mission.
Absolutely.
From there as opposed to from the Earth's surface.
Absolutely.
For obvious reasons.
Exactly. So if you're trying to get water off of the surface of the Earth, it's a lot of thrust and it's a big rocket. But when you have, I say water, H2O cracked into hydrogen and oxygen, if you have hydrogen and oxygen in orbit around the moon that has been taken from the surface of the moon, all of a sudden access to the broader solar system, the cost goes way down. When you're in an orbit around the moon, the delta V, the amount of energy it takes to go somewhere, is minuscule compared to the amount of energy it takes to leave Earth's gravity well.
Or to get up out of your bed in the morning, right? Because the gravity's just not there.
That's right.
Or it's much lower.
Well, not just much lower, but when you're in orbit, it's a whole orbit around the moon. It's a whole lot lower because you're not even in. You're trapped by the moon's gravity well, but you're not deep in the moon's gravity well.
Which is not that powerful to begin with.
It's not. It's 1/6 that of the Earth. So if you weigh 100 pounds, you would, weigh less than 20.
Amazing. All right. So is there a timeline? I mean, this is all people, like I said, my friend, excited. People are excited to hear this. And they've obviously, every day you've been back.
Yeah.
I think this week somebody say, hey, we need you to come to our place and talk, Mr.
Right.
Bridenstine, because this is cool stuff.
Yeah.
How long is this all going to take to do?
So we have an objective from the president to land on the moon with the next man and the first woman. And it very well could be the first 2 women by 2024. So that's what we're working towards right now. We're going to land on the moon by 2024 and have the sustainable architecture in place by 2028.
Wow. And this is not the only iron in the NASA fire. I mean,
No,
there's
not
other
at all.
stuff.
We talked about the commercialization effort. We talked about commercial resupply to the International Space Station, commercial crew to the International Space Station, and eventually commercial space stations in general. All of this architecture is because of how NASA is currently investing its money. We don't want to purchase, own, and operate rockets. We want to be a customer. We want to be one customer in a robust commercial marketplace in low Earth orbit, and we want to have numerous providers that are competing against each other on cost and innovation. So if you look at how we're going to space now, we have that. We have multiple providers that are competing to get access to NASA dollars so that we can launch our astronauts on their vehicles. Now, what that means is they're doing everything they can to innovate, because if they don't innovate, they're not going to be competitive in the marketplace. This is why we now have reusable rockets. That's a big cost saver.
SpaceX.
Exactly. They did that because they're competing to achieve the lowest cost solution for NASA's objectives. This is very different. It used to be NASA would purchase, own, and operate. When we create a competitive marketplace, all of a sudden we're seeing massive amounts of innovation, and that's driving down cost and increasing access.
And one would think there will be ramifications back here, on terra firma.
Oh, without question. And I'd be happy to talk about those.
Stop down for 1 second. Rick, are you wanting to jump in here, brother?
Yeah, I can wait. Brent, are you rolling? Or are you hooked up?
Yeah, he's been rolling on all of it. Okay.
And you can just address Russell when you answer.
Okay.
If we're ready. So they sent me in here. It is popped up. It seems like once a month this story pops up. And it doesn't seem to die. Have you declared Pluto a planet?
Now I was going to ask about we're not talking about the Disney dog here. We're talking about the mysterious lumpy piece of whatever floating out there the other side of Uranus. So what?
So here's the thing about Pluto. In 2006, Pluto got downgraded.
Yes.
And it was no longer a quote-unquote planet. Now, that happened for a lot of reasons. We found all of these objects in the Kuiper Belt, which is even on the other side of Pluto, that look like they could be about the size and maybe shape, maybe even bigger than Pluto. And so all of a sudden, it looked like there could be hundreds of planets out there in the Kuiper Belt. So how do we define a planet? So in 2006, the American Astronomical Society decided we're going to create a definition. And that definition had that a planet has to clear the orbit around the sun, or clear the neighborhood around the orbit that it's in around the sun. And so what that means is that the gravity of that planet has to be big enough to where it absorbs all of the asteroids and all of the debris that might be in that orbit around the sun, and or it captures in its gravity and it creates satellites or moons. And so you look at Jupiter with 70-some moons, and Saturn with I don't know how many dozens of moons. So those would then, by that definition, they would be planets because they clear their orbit around the sun. Well, it just so turns out that Pluto sometimes goes out into the Kuiper Belt where there's a big asteroid field. There's an asteroid belt, on the other side of Pluto. Sometimes it gets affected by, Neptune's gravity. And so the question is that a planet? Is it not a planet? But here's what I think is interesting. We did a mission. That definition was redefined in 2006. Okay. In 2015, NASA did a mission to Pluto. And here's what we found. It has an active atmosphere. In fact, it's got a multi-layer atmosphere. It has a very active geology. So it has plate tectonics going on Pluto. It includes organic compounds, which are the building blocks for life. And no, I'm not saying life is there. I don't know, but neither does anybody else. It has the largest glacier in the solar system is on Pluto, as a matter of fact.
So there's water.
Well, it's actually a glacier made out of organic compound. It's methane, actually.
Oh, okay.
It's methane and nitrogen and a couple of other things. But here's what we do know. I would say here's what is likely based on the gravitational kind of forces that we've seen on Pluto. It is likely that there is liquid water under the surface of Pluto. In other words, Pluto has an ocean. Now, to me, you look at the most fascinating things in our solar system, all of a sudden Pluto in 2015 became one of the most fascinating things in our solar system.
Because we thought we had just like a lump of rock out there, and it's way more complex.
Yeah, a lot of scientists thought it was just a big rock out there, and it is not. It is fascinating. And so, yes, I call Pluto a planet. Sometimes it might irk people, but I'm going to continue calling it a planet because I believe that it should be a planet. And by the way, all of those objects in the Kuiper Belt, we're starting to identify and characterize them. I think, there could be maybe 3 or 4 objects that could also, quite frankly, be identified as planets. But I think planets should be defined based on their intrinsic qualities and value, not necessarily by what orbit they're in, if that makes sense.
Oh, go ahead, Britt.
So,
I can
that's okay. No, I've just got, so how should students in class today, because they've heard both. I remember growing up, my very educated mother just served us 9 pizzas. How should students be viewing this planet?
Yeah.
Are we teaching them wrong right now?
Well, no, so really this debate is about semantics. It's all it is. It's about semantics. Pluto is today as it was, back in 2006 when they redefined. It hasn't changed. So what we're talking about is taxonomy, which is how do we categorize the objects in space? Here's what I think students should take away. They should take away that Pluto is an amazing world and it is fascinating. And I think we should do another mission to Pluto, not just a flyby, but in fact, an orbiting mission to Pluto so that we can get even more spectacular information. I would also say that New Horizons probe that gave us that amazing information on Pluto, it went past Pluto. It is now in the Kuiper Belt, 4 billion miles from Earth. And it is making still amazing discoveries. On January 1st of this year, it flew by Ultima Thule, which is an asteroid way out there in the Kuiper Belt. And what we find out is it's not just an asteroid; it's 2 asteroids that came together because of their own gravities and eventually became joined. It looks like a big dumbbell. So it's really giving us amazing information about all of these. So we call it a binary contact. That's what that asteroid is now called. And when I say it's a big asteroid, it's not just a rock, it's a big rock. But it's a binary contact, and it billions of years ago, these 2 asteroids came together, and now they're stuck together. It's pretty amazing.
And, with this moon base functional and up, this kind of exploration and those kind of missions are going to, I would think, multiply at a pretty good clip.
Absolutely. So when the moon base gets created, I'm talking about Gateway and missions on the surface of the moon. So the moon architecture in its entirety, Gateway being the orbiting space station around the moon. What we're going to be able to do from the far side of the moon is we're going to be able to see way out into deep space in ways we can't see on this side of the moon because on the far side of the moon, the electromagnetic radiation coming from the Earth, because of all of the emissions, like this radio station, for example.
We're doing our part.
all of those emissions are blocked by the moon.
Right.
So when you're on the far side of the moon, it's very, very quiet from an electromagnetic spectrum perspective. So you can use infrared energy, or you can use basically infrared sensors to collect infrared energy from deep space. So we're going to be able to see on the far side of the moon, not just cosmic dawn, which is the first light in the universe after the Big Bang, but we're going to be able to see before cosmic dawn, we're going to be able to see. So we're not looking out into space. We're looking back into time. And after the Big Bang, there was this time when there was no light, and then light appeared. As the universe expanded, light eventually became available and it appeared. We're going to be able to see from the far side of the moon the time before light appeared, and it's going to be magnificent. And the mission that I'm advocating for that is called DAPPER, and DAPPER is going to be in orbit around the moon. But because we have this gateway in orbit around the moon, instead of DAPPER costing $500 million, we can do the mission for $90 million. Because the orbiting platform with humans on board has a big, it has a high aperture antenna where we can get high throughput data back to Earth. So normally you'd have to carry that on a designated satellite. But now with just a comm relay, because we're going to have this architecture, this communications architecture around the moon, it drives down the cost for doing astrophysics, which is what I'm talking about here. And of course, there's so much more about what we can do in space once we have this lunar architecture from a science perspective, but I would need another radio show to do that.
No kidding. We could go for weeks about, the ramifications of literally opening up the universe to exploration.
That's right.
So I guess the elephant in the room here is, how do we lay claim to say, oh, well, we're doing this stuff on the moon is ours?
Yeah,
I would think there are a couple other actors on this planet that are made. So like China, like Russia, like India now is trying to get in space. Japan wants to get in space.
That's right.
Everybody and their dead uncle, kind of. You mentioned UAE. I don't know if they're actually thinking about it.
Oh,
but
yeah.
I'll bet they are.
UAE is doing a mission to Mars right now with the support of NASA.
So
this is a great diplomatic capability of our nation.
So we're saying we're going to put this, this gateway around the moon, but we're also going to be putting physical things on the moon. We're going to be trying to work with that ice on the South Pole, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How do we work out that? I mean, there? I would have to imagine there is discussion of that topic, right?
Well, here's where I think the risk is. Number one, the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, signed by the United States and pretty much everybody in the world has signed the Outer Space Treaty. It says very specifically that a nation cannot appropriate the moon for national sovereignty. So in 1969, when we landed on the moon and we put the American flag there, we did not declare the moon property of the United States because we signed a treaty saying that we wouldn't. And the Russians signed a treaty saying that they wouldn't. So that was kind of that was the beginning of an idea that you could not own the moon. Now, when I was in the House of Representatives, okay, so we'll start there. Next thing is, we talk about rare earth metals. Mm-hmm. Rare earth metals are not earth metals. They're asteroid impacts from billions of years ago.
Which is why they're rare.
That's exactly right. The problem with the Earth is we've got this very active geology and a very active hydrosphere. So those rare earth metals, they're not only rare when they impact the Earth, but they become even more rare over time. They degrade. They're found in very trace amounts after billions of years after an asteroid impact. But those rare earth metals, as I said, are not earth metals. They're asteroid impacts. And look at the moon. The moon goes through the same piece of space that the Earth goes through, which means it has lots of asteroid impacts, and you only have to look at it to know that that's true. The difference is it doesn't have an active geology. It doesn't have an active hydrosphere, which means whatever impacted the moon billions of years ago is today right where it was billions of years ago.
Laying there on the surface.
Probably under, but somewhere. It could be large deposits of platinum group metals, which would be tremendously valuable. Could be worth hundreds of billions of dollars. And I'm not saying that it's there. I don't know. Neither does anybody else. We've got to go find out.
Because again, we kept landing in the same spot.
Right. And you got to get under the surface to get to those kind of deposits. When you impact the moon, you really impact the moon. But we need to go make these discoveries, because when you're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars, you're talking about changing, or I should say trillions of dollars. Yeah. We're talking about changing the balance of power on Earth when we talk about that kind of resource. But so we know we can't own the moon from the Outer Space Treaty, and yet there's all these resources that could potentially be there, which is why a lot of billionaires might want to go. It's also why a lot of foreign countries might want to go. A lot of people say, well, we know China's going. We're pretty sure they're not going to collect rocks. So when we put all these things together, we say, how do we claim the resources if we can't own the moon? Well, it's really simple. And I put it into law when I was in the House of Representatives. You don't have to own the moon to own the resources of the moon. Just like you cannot claim the ocean for national sovereignty, but if you apply your equity and your sweat and your effort to acquiring resources from the ocean, namely energy, then you can have the rights to that energy. And that there's law and precedent for 100 years that you can have the rights to that energy. You can have the rights to, for example, the fish that you pull out of the ocean. So these are resources that we know that you can have for yourself, but you also don't own the ocean when you have those resources. So that law and precedent applied to the moon, we put it into law in the United States. We said if you apply your equity and your effort and your time to going to get those resources, you own the resources, but you do not own the moon. So we are in compliance with the Outer Space Treaty, but of course we're encouraging folks, and that's one of the reasons we want to build this architecture. So if somebody wants to go to the moon for commercial purposes, you have access. We're trying to make that available to a lot of people. Again, it will take investment from private industry, but there will be an architecture that enables it from NASA.
Sounds to me like it's kind of a race, and that's why we would like to be there by, you said 2024.
2024. Yeah. So the 2024 deadline is not necessarily because of a race. My view is, we've tried to go to the moon in the past since 1972. The last time we had somebody on the moon, we had in the 90s, we had the Space Exploration Initiative. In the 2000s, we had the Vision for Space Exploration. And each of these programs failed because they took too long. And, administrations change, Congresses change, budgets change, and the programs get canceled. So the risk is you've got technical risk, which NASA is really good at retiring technical risk, and then you've got political risk. The political risk is what gets us every time. So how do you retire as much as possible the political risk? Well, you go faster. And that's what we're doing. We accelerated the timeline. President said, how quick can we get there? We said, sir, we think we can get there in 2024. We're going to need resources to do it, but we can make it happen. And he helped us amend the budget request to get those resources so we could accelerate the program. This is in my view, it's about American greatness. That's in the president's view as well. I should say it's in his view, and because of that, it's in my view, just to get the right order there. But the reality is it's on the agenda to achieve, and we're working hard to achieve it.
It's all amazing. All right, so as I was walking in, I saw Rick Corey heading out. By the way, Rick says hi.
Oh, yes. Tell Rick hello.
And he said to ask him about the spacewalk. So apparently there was some equipment that needed some maintenance.
Yeah.
Maintenance that is not normally done in zero gravity while spinning tens of thousands of miles per hour or whatever, but they're doing it.
Yeah.
I know that you've been busy, obviously, not following minute by minute what's going on there, but that's kind of a big deal.
Happens, yeah. So we've got 10 spacewalks in a row that we're doing within a matter of weeks. So we're doing a lot of maintenance. The International Space Station has been around now for 20 years. We're in the 20th year right now. And so it's not new, and it can't last forever. And so it needs maintenance from time to time. What we're doing today, the spacewalk that started at 7 a.m. this morning, was really an astrophysics mission that needed some new equipment. And so the astronauts are outside getting that. So the space station is not just about doing experiments on the space station. It's also about doing astrophysics, looking way out into deep space. In fact, I think it's an alpha particle kind of instrument to basically look at the radiation coming from deep space. But we also do Earth science from the space station. So we're looking at the Earth in every part of the electromagnetic spectrum, just in general. But from the space station, we have a number of very specific missions that we test. And then once we test and prove that they're good at collecting information that we need, then we can go bigger with a constellation that can stand alone apart from the space station. So the space station is used for a proving ground for a lot of these science things. But really what we're using the space station for right now is breakthrough technologies for life on Earth. So we're proving on the space station, we're working on being able to print human organs in 3D so that if you have a kidney failure, we can get you a kidney that matches your exact perfect DNA. We can build it for you on the International Space Station, print human organs in 3D, bring it back to Earth, and save your life potentially. So these are things, and the problem is if you try to create that kind of tissue on Earth using adult stem cells, it goes flat. The tissue just goes flat because of the gravity. But in space, you can create the 3 dimensions that it mimics a baby in the womb, if you can imagine that. Because when you're in amniotic fluid, you're actually in kind of a weightlessness environment. It's very similar to the weightlessness of space. So what we're using space to create those capabilities to save lives on Earth. Another example, advanced materials. We can use materials to create artificial retinas in space in a way you cannot do on Earth. So if there are people that have macular degeneration, we can create artificial retinas in space, bring them back to Earth, and then prevent people from going blind. And that's what so imagine a box that fits in the palm of your hand that has the materials for 1,000 artificial retinas. It goes up to the space station, it comes down, and all of a sudden you've got 1,000 artificial retinas that are reimbursed by insurance at $75,000 a piece. All of a sudden there's a business case for creating a commercial space station in orbit apart from the International Space Station. The International Space Station is not really designed for commercial activity. What we're doing is we're proving physics, we're proving technology, we're proving these things, and then we can license it to private industry, and then they can go build their own private space stations, commercial space stations. And that's why we've developed, as NASA, we've developed commercial crew, commercial resupply, and now commercial space stations. We want this to be a robust commercial marketplace. NASA needs to be a customer, not the owner and operator of the capability. I talked about artificial retinas. I talked about printing human organs in 3D. We're also creating fiber optics in a way that's so pure you don't need repeaters, drives down the cost in an amazing way. So now we've got private companies proving that they can create fiber optic cables on the International Space Station in a way where the market case closes to create a manufacturing capability for fiber optic cables in space. Well, so many other things.
And and that's just stuff that probably was stumbled across, or this is just literally the the very tip. There's so much more. So much more. We're just basics. We're compounding pharmaceuticals in space in a way you cannot do in the gravity well of Earth. And so that there's going to be life-saving treatments from that. And there already are. Immunizations. We can create immunizations in space that we cannot create here on Earth. And remember, the International Space Station, it's 20 years old, but during those 20 years, it's mostly been in development. We've only been operational, using it now for I don't know how many years, but not a whole lot compared to the 20-year cycle there. So we're only at the tip of the iceberg. There's amazing breakthroughs that are in front of us. We can't even think today what the breakthroughs are going to be in the future. It is truly fascinating, and I could sit here for hours, but I know you don't have that kind of time. I'll bet you're super happy not to have to deal with all the politics that's going on in Washington, right?
Well, make no mistake.
I'm just going to leave that right.
We get our appropriation from Congress.
Well,
so
that's very true. And there was that whole budget thing we were
right.
talking about. But honestly, I think NASA, you could honestly say, is probably the least political.
Absolutely.
Branch or department or agency in all of government.
Yeah, everybody loves NASA. Republicans love NASA. Democrats love NASA. Our international partners. I go to Europe. I'm more popular in Europe than I am in the United States. They love NASA in Europe. So it's the best brand that America has. And it is nice to run an agency that everybody likes because people like what we do, and we don't regulate. I mean,
you're not imposing rules. You're
right.
doing cool science
right.
and making us a kidneys.
That's right.
Yay, right? And all right. Well, listen. Always a pleasure to talk with you. We didn't even get into your history with the Air and Space Museum and how you got into all this. But what's interesting right now is what's next, and you are right in that cusp. And I so much appreciate you coming in and sharing that with us.
Well, thank you.
Anything else that is on your mind today besides those spacewalkers?
Well, I would just ask, to achieve these objectives, we need to get appropriations. I know a lot of politicians listen to your radio station, and I would encourage them to get to work and get these appropriations done. We are very grateful. NASA has increasing budgets now for the first time in decades. 2 years in a row, our budget has gone up significantly. And that's because people are seeing that what we are achieving, believing in it, and doubling down. Maybe not doubling down, but increasing our budget. And so that's all very positive. We're still well below where we were in the 1960s, but we are going up for the first time in decades. We have bipartisan support in the House, bipartisan support in the Senate, and of course, we've got a president that is requesting more funds for NASA. And there aren't very many agencies that the president requests more funds for, but this is one of them. So we're thrilled with that, and we would just ask that our members of Congress get those appropriations done so that NASA can keep doing its great work.
Outstanding. NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine, thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you.